Howdy again everyone, and today I'm testing out another lens from Chinese manufacturer Viltrox, their new autofocus 85mm f1.8 lens for Sony E-mount cameras, full frame or APS-C. Don't mix it up with their manual focus lens, this is a newer autofocus model. It's available for $380 or £320 in the UK, so it strongly undercuts the price of Sony's 85mm f1.8 FE lens. Upon receiving this lens for testing, I immediately got a sense of déjà vu because I've actually already tested this lens on Fuji mount. Despite it being a full frame camera lens, it was initially made for Fuji's smaller sensor APS-C cameras. In my test of the Fuji version, its optical characteristics quickly betrayed the fact that the lens was yielding a full frame image circle, and my guess was that a Sony E-mount version would come soon, and here it is. So this is exciting for me because now I can test how the lens performs on a full frame camera, and my Sony A7R II has in-body image stabilization as well, which makes this lens even more enjoyable to use. I really liked using the lens on Fuji mount, let's see how this new Sony version does. And I'd like to thank Viltrox for providing a sample lens for testing, although as usual, this is a totally independent review. The lens has a fully metallic body, feeling weighty and very solid, and it's based on a metal lens mount, which does not have a weather sealing gasket. However, there is a USB port on the back for firmware updates, which is always encouraging to see. I like the lens's overall look. The lack of a thick edging around the front glass element really shows it off. The body of the lens is dominated by a manual focus ring, which is unbelievably smooth to turn. Goodness knows what kind of lubricating oil Viltrox have used in the mechanism, but it feels absolutely amazing, and the focus motor responds to its use quite precisely. The autofocus motor works quickly and almost silently and accurately, but it does hunt a little before finally locking on to your subject. When using it to shoot video, it slows down but still hunts just a little. The autofocus makes a very quiet clicking sound as the focus mechanism micro-adjusts. It's barely audible though. On my Sony A7R II, the eye autofocus feature worked okay in my tests, occasionally missing just slightly. As you can see here, the lens exhibits some notable focus breathing, zooming in as you focus more closely. The lens has a filter thread size of 72mm, and it comes with a reasonably sized plastic hood and a thin cloth pouch. It does not have its own built-in image stabilization. Overall, I really like its build quality, although its autofocus system could be slightly more confident. Maybe a firmware update will come along one day to fix that slight hunting. Alright then, image quality. Firstly, let's have a look at how it performs on a high-resolution full-frame camera, my 42MP A7R II. In-camera corrections are turned on. At f1.8, the middle of the image is pretty sharp, with pretty good contrast. Corner image quality is quite sharp, but with some quite visible colour fringing. Stop down to f2.8 for more sharpness and a lot more contrast in those corners, and spectacular sharpness now back in the middle. Stop down to f4 for just a tiny extra improvement in the middle, and the tiniest of improvements back in the corners, although we still see some chromatic aberration. There's just a tiny extra improvement in the corners at f5.6, and it stays this sharp down to f11, but f16 is a little softer. Overall, the lens's sharpness on full frame is great, although it needs to be stopped down to f2.8 to really fly on a 42MP camera, and chromatic aberration is a bit of a problem in the corners, again on a 42MP camera. Well, let's see how it works on an APS-C camera now, my little 24MP Sony A5100. At f1.8, again we see great sharpness in the middle of the image, although just a little purple fringing is visible. But the good news is that sharpness remains brilliant in the corners on APS-C. Stop down to f2.8 to reduce that pesky purple fringing and just enjoy the sharpness. In fact, stop down to f4 to see even a little more. Again, the image stays this sharp down to f11, and it's only at f16 that diffraction begins to soften the image. So, it's a great performance on APS-C, even sharper than it was on full frame. Nice. Alright then, let's take a look at vignetting and distortion on a full frame camera. Immediately, we see some pretty noticeable pincushion distortion here, stronger than usual. Vignetting is about average, with darkness in the corners at f1.8, which is greatly reduced at f2.8, and at f4, just about gone. This lens can focus as closely as 85 cm to your subject, completely average for an 85mm lens. Here you can see that image quality remains very sharp at close focus distances, but stopped down to f2.8 for a bit of extra contrast. Next, let's see how the lens performs against bright light. As you can see here, the Viltrox lens displays quite broad flaring when bright lights are in your picture, so flaring is not very well controlled here, but I have seen worse. Let's take a look at bokeh. A lens like this on a full-frame camera can get you some dramatically out-of-focus backgrounds, and generally, this lens's out-of-focus backgrounds are really nice and soft, although complex backgrounds can look just a little bit jumbled. Related to bokeh is longitudinal chromatic aberration. Here you can see it's a little strong at f1.8, green bokeh highlights beyond the plane of focus and pink behind. It's still visible at f2.8, and even at f4, some traces of it still remain. Overall, I really enjoyed testing out the Viltrox 85mm on my full-frame Sony camera. When I was using the lens out in a field, getting sample pictures and looking at their sharpness, I thought the lens might be optically as good as the official Sony equivalent. My pixel peeping tests revealed that its quality is not quite that strong. The Viltrox lens shows a bit more chromatic aberration and distortion than the Sony, and its autofocus wasn't quite as confident. But bearing in mind the lens's very good sharpness and nice bokeh, alongside its impressively metallic build quality, I think most people will be pretty delighted with it, and it's clearly good value for money, so it comes recommended.